Hello, everyone. I'm Ranjana Khanna. I'm the director of the Franklin Humanities Institute here at Duke. Thank you very much for joining us today for this event to commemorate the passing of Nawal El Saadawi, writer, physician, psychiatrist, controversial feminist activist, and friend to many here. From the 1970s on, she has been one of the most famous, indeed infamous, feminists in the world. And she really never stopped protesting, of course, taking to the streets, even in 2011, the age of 79, joining protesters in Tahrir Square. Something of that life of protest emerges into her writing, not only in memoirs, but also in the fiction, some of it overtly based in biography, some not, such that a novella like Woman Point Zero will present the familiar frame tropes of storytelling between women through the threat of the murderous arm of the state as that of a story of a psychiatrist listening to a prisoner. The many obituaries written about Nawal El Saadawi note her 50-odd books, her memoir written in prison with eyeliner on toilet paper, her work against FGM and the fear and reprisal she engendered in various Egyptian governments. They also note something of the clarity of her politics and her thinking, the sparseness of her prose, and something of the unforgiving nature of that clarity. For our purposes today, let me say something about her presence at Duke in the 1990s. That was before my time here, but the relationships established at that point made it that she returned to Duke in the 2000s also, at which point I was honored to have the opportunity of being on a panel with her, Geeta Sehgal and Meg Segrest, on the use of women as rationale for the war in Afghanistan that was organized by Miriam Cooke and Rashmi Varma, our colleague who was at UNC Chapel Hill at the time and now teaches at the University of Warwick in the UK. How did she come to be at Duke? Well, this is the way she tells it in her own autobiographical writing. In a piece called Why Keep Asking Me About My Identity, which I think already demonstrates the sort of ongoing Marxist feminist frustration with the question of identitarian thinking. This is what she says. Quote, would the fatal bullet be shot in my back by a bodyguard or from the front by a youth wearing a religious mask? As I sat in my home surrounded by enemies on every side, not knowing what to do, fortune intervened. An American student named Elizabeth had come to Cairo to pursue some studies, and by sheer accident, she decided to take a chance and visit me after failing to get through to me by phone. At one time, she had been a student at Duke University, and when she saw the armed guards around my home, she suddenly said to me, "Why don't you leave?" I said, "Where to? I cannot leave like that just to any place. I must know where I'm going and what I'll do." Next day, she phoned up a friend of hers at Duke, Professor Miriam Cooke, who taught Arabic literature, including several of my novels. And that's how I became a migrant and an exile, living in the USA for 4 years as a visiting professor at Duke. They were good years, and I was happy to be there. But as the years went by, I felt I must return, even if my life was in danger. Miriam then was instrumental in bringing her here, and Miriam tells the story thus. In early January 1993, my student, Elizabeth Oram, was in Cairo. She was with Nawal the night the guards turned up to protect her from the Muslim Brothers. They had published Nawal El Saadawi in the Witness Box, a widely available cheap book that made the case that she should be put to death. Elizabeth called me and asked if Duke could give Nawal asylum. The next day, Nawal called to confirm the urgency of her situation. These guards were the same as those who had held her in prison a decade earlier. She was afraid of them, more afraid of them than of the Islamists. I went to Dean Malcolm Gillis, and he immediately invited Nawal to come to Duke with her husband at the time, Sharif Hetata. They stayed for 4 years. Miriam recalls that it was not the easiest task to convince some in the administration. Toromoy helped her, but before the days of such institutions like Scholars at Risk that are very active, that have been very active more recently, Dean Gillist opened up all sorts of possibilities. Nawal writes fondly of her time at Duke for the most part, though in true fighting style, we do not get off unscathed. She's critical of how our universalist ideas show interest in localized theories, but never consider their own parochialisms. Hopefully today we do a little bit better than we did at that time and learned from her criticism. Like Marx, she believed in an astute and ruthless criticism of absolutely everything. Thanks very much for joining us today. I'm now going to hand over to Ellen McClarney.
Thank you everyone for joining today. We welcome today a panel of friends and colleagues paying tribute to the incredibly vibrant life and legacy of Nawal El Saadawi and her unparalleled body of work. Miriam Cooke, the Braxton Craven Professor of Arab Cultures at Duke University. Bruce Lawrence, the Nancy and Jeffrey Marcus Humanities Professor of Religion at Duke. Zimu Niu, Professor at Guangdong University of Foreign Studies. Margot Badran, Senior Scholar at the Woodrow Wilson Center and Senior Fellow at the Prince Al-Walid Ibn Talal Center for Muslim Christian Understanding at Georgetown University. Walter Mignolo, the William Wanamaker Professor of Literature and Romance Studies at Duke. Evelyne Accad, Professor at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign and an author. Leila Ahmed, the Victor S. Thomas Research Professor at the Harvard Divinity School. Welcome.
Greetings to everyone. It's wonderful to see so many people joining us here at Duke to celebrate the extraordinary life of Nawal El Saadawi. When I heard the news last Sunday morning, I had the same reaction that many of you have expressed: bereavement. I'd lost my mother and mentor, the woman who for half my life had inspired me to walk through fire. My next reaction was a sense of blessing. That probably is not what most of you felt. The blessing for her is that she's finally released from the terrible physical suffering that had tortured her body for the last 2 years. She's no longer anguished about her writing and her physical inability to finish the third volume of her autobiography that she started at Duke. She's no longer frustrated that she cannot respond to the many invitations she was still receiving at age 89 from around the world. Nawal loved to speak to new audiences and to inspire them with her transformative message. While she was with us here at Duke, between 1993 and 97, our fax machine worked overtime, ran out of paper even. Invitations from all 5 continents poured into our little building on Campus Drive on a daily basis. Nawal would plan her trips according to her classes, Dissidence and Creativity, that she taught with Sharif, her husband, but also according to our film schedule. Nawal and I, with our husbands, Sharif and Bruce, went to every new film that looked interesting, and afterwards, the best part, the discussions would go on for longer than the film had lasted and late into the night. Nawal's schedule defied description then, but did not relent as she moved into her 70s. And let me read just one email from May the 5th, 2009, that Nawal sent to me at 11:46 at night, before she was planning to come here. I leave to Cincinnati on the 8th of May, then to Torino on the 13th of May, then to LA on the 19th of May, then to Atlanta on the 25th of May, and then I will be with you at the end of May. The woman was 78 years old. That life lived so fully was a blessing for her and for all of us. It is what I have felt, this blessing for us, is something I have been feeling for the past 8 days. Nawal is now everywhere, no longer confined to her bed in her Shubra apartment overlooking the Nile and the pyramids. We can tap into her power and love wherever we are on this earthly globe. What can I say that has not been said by so many of you already? How to find amidst the treasure of her words, the pithiest and the most representative. Impossible to choose, because of course every word that she wrote and that so many of you have quoted represents the passionate person she was from the beginning of her life to its end. She did not deviate from her message of justice for all, and she meant all. Her 50 books were grounded in her deep knowledge and love for her country and people, and in their intense particularity, they reached us all wherever we were. The Egyptian prisoner Firdaus of Woman at Point Zero is the best known. On the eve of her execution for killing her pimp, Firdaus finally allows the psychiatrist to hear her story. The story speaks to and of all women who have, in extremis, had to kill the men who believed that they could continue with impunity to abuse the women in their power. Nawal's grandmother, her god of justice, was Nawal's guiding light as she sought to make the world a better place for women and turn for women and men around the world, whatever price she had to pay. There's so many examples. So let me tell you a lesser known story. It was the late 1990s when Nawal was still on the Islamist death list. We were in Rabat for a conference. At lunch on the second day, some bearded men wearing white kuffis entered the dining room and sat at a large table close to ours. Digging her elbow into my ribs and giving me one of her conspiratorial winks, she stood up and, to my horror, walked right up to the table. Fixing her gaze on one of the men who was hiding behind his neighbor, she said, "Yeah, Ahmed, my old friend from our communist days, what are you doing here?" Nawal, he stuttered. She smiled triumphantly at the unveiling of the communist turned Islamist, and then turned to the other bearded man who almost as shocked as Ahmed. "So, where are you men from?" "No, why are you here?" "God save us," I whispered to myself, knowing that some of these men might well have been part of the campaign to kill her. "They'd come to participate in another conference on Islam," they said. "Was it for men only?" she asked. "No, there were women also." "So where are these women?" "In another hotel." "Would the women be participating in that conference?" "Of course," the men proudly replied. "I want to meet them." So the men agreed to set up a meeting at the women's hotel the next day. Just before the appointed hour, Nawal was fierce about being on time, preferably early. We strode into a hall full of women. They were a-twitter with excitement, smiling and some shyly waving at us. As we turned to the front of the hall where we were supposed to sit, we saw 3 of the bearded men sitting next to where we were told to sit. They had promised there would be no men. Nothing daunted, Nawal sat next to them, thus providing a buffer between them and an increasingly nervous me. She spoke for a few moments, and then opened the floor to the women's questions. Hands shot up, some softballs, and then not so soft, as the discussion turned to women's rights in Islam. Nawal cited several Quranic verses, and the men jumped into the fray, and things got heated. Nawal turned to them and told them she was not talking to them, but to the women. Anyhow, she added pointedly, "If you want to debate with me, you should read your Quran first." That was the last straw for them, and the men began to hurl abuse and to threaten her. My nervousness at that point had turned to fear. "Let's go," I said. After a slight hesitation, she let me drag her out of the room. "Oh my God," I gasped on our way out. "Why did you do that, Nawal?" And she responded, "If I could persuade even only one woman in that hall full of veiled women to listen to me and to learn her rights and how to fight for them, it will have been worth it. As you know, I have always been and always will be ready to pay the price for justice." There are so many other such events. I could spend all day recounting their pleasures and, of course, their terrors. But last Monday's Facebook posting from my friend, Professor Rashmi Varma, whom Ranji has mentioned just earlier, was a lovely reminder. And she writes in her post, "A hero, may she rest in power. Our special memory, one special memory, is having her be part of a feminist fight fundamentalist teach-in that Miriam Cooke and I had organized between Duke and UNC in November of 2001. And she writes beautifully, "I remember these 2 days as among the most inspiring in my whole life." So in lieu of citing Nawal's words or the triviality of my own, I will close with these words of our daughter, Anna, a feminist historian who came to love Nawal during the years that she and Sharif spent with Bruce and me in the Duke University family. She wrote this to me a couple of days ago. "I feel lucky that I had a chance to bask in her glow during our trip to Egypt. I remember her at her best, however, in North Carolina with both of you. She seemed so brilliantly happy then with that 100-watt smile. I know she feels your love now as she floats beyond this world of corporeal pain and limitations into a world of love and light, right where she belongs." Yes, Anna. Like all of her best protagonists, Nawal dreamt of flying in this life and beyond. So when Bruce and I read Surah Yasin, Ya Insan, for the surah that's read for the dead. So when we read Surah Yasin, as soon as we heard the news on Sunday, March the 21st, we felt she was with us. I suspect she was scolding us for what she would have called our superstitious reaction to her departure. But I like to think that perhaps also she was smiling her 100-watt smile. Thank you.
So let me just begin by saying that I have only one word that etches and evokes Nawal for me, and that is smile. All caps, all pervasive. Nawal never ceased to find joy even in the midst of pain, injustice, alienation, and for her, worst of all, indifference to the suffering of others. Her life redefines compassion as the benchmark of humanity. She projected that value through her writing, speaking, protesting, but also her teaching and mentoring of others. Nawal did not act alone. Among her valiant supporters and defenders was her husband, Sharif Atata. Together, they came to Duke in the mid-90s. Together, they taught a generation of Duke students the value of sustained engagement with structures of injustice, oppression, denigration. In thinking about today, I went back over many letters and I found one from a grad student in fall of 1993. He noted how Sharif and Nawal conducted a class on women in politics in the Arab world. It was a large class. All joined it expecting to meet Nawal and Sharif. It is, in his words, impossibly stern, imposing figures of undeniable authority, unquote. Instead, what this student and his classmates discovered was that Nawal and Sharif refused at first to take center stage in their own class. Instead, they sat quietly, listening for a full 3 sessions before integrating their own experience and insight into the class. Months later, this same puzzled grad student asked them, was it not uncomfortable to sit for 3 awkward days as new professors and say nothing? replied Sharif. If you've been in prison for 13 years, 3 days of awkwardness is not too long to wait to get a class of students to open up. That same grit and humility was what struck another Duke student, this one an undergrad, who'd taken a first-year seminar on religion and resistance taught mostly by Nawal. That was in the fall of 1996, toward the end of the time that Nawal and Sharif were at Duke. The same student, Asad Rahman, wrote to me impromptu after hearing Nawal's demise a week ago Sunday. She had an almost irrational regard, he recalled, an almost irrational regard for those who knew less than her, understood less than her, or were a couple steps behind her. Her entire interaction with that class in fall 1996, he noted, was a level most did not understand or appreciate till much later. But what we did realize, even then, was that never for a moment was Nawal going to let us be just a class of 18-year-old freshmen. And so what Nawal and Sharif projected together was what the grad student had sensed in 1993, and I quote him, a warmth, humanity, personal concern, and deep humility that radiated immediately to those around them. He concludes, they were not only world-class political and cultural figures, they were also universe-class pedagogues, teachers for the ages with a wisdom born of experience, a commitment boundless and sincere to all who knew, cherished, and loved them. They will be missed, but never forgotten. Thank you.
Dear friends, first, I would like to thank you for organizing this gathering and for having me aboard, and for moving me ahead in the list of speakers because I am currently in China, so it is actually midnight for me. So I will keep my speech short. My chronicles with Dr. Nawal Saadawi. It was in 2011 when I decided to choose Nawal Saadawi as the topic of my PhD dissertation because I thought that she was a different writer in the Arab world. And it was in 2012 when I got in touch with Nawal Saadawi herself and also with Professor Miriam Cooke, a friend and once a colleague of Nawal Saadawi herself. In 2013, I went to Duke University as a visiting scholar sent by the Chinese Ministry of Education and became a student of Professor Miriam Cooke for 1 year. In 2014, I invited both Dr. Nawal Saadawi and Professor Miriam Cooke to Beijing, where both of them were very popular with Chinese students and scholars and Chinese writers. In 2015, my PhD dissertation received the award of Outstanding Dissertation in Beijing Foreign Studies University. However, since 2016, things started to be difficult for me, and the biggest problem was that my book, based on the PhD dissertation, couldn't seem to get published. In 2020, after years of requiring me to revise, I was finally notified that this book couldn't be published because of its controversial topic. But luckily, a friend helped me out by having it published anyway in the UAE. In 2021, my professor in Beijing Foreign Studies University informed me about the passing of Nawal Saadawi. And currently, another professor in Peking University is preparing a special issue of their review in Arabic literature in the honor of Nawal Saadawi. And also in 2021, I am here once again with scholars and professors, some of whom I had the fortune of meeting in person, and others I had only seen in quotations. In my chronicles with Dr. Nawal Saadawi, not everything turned out to be in my favor. But if I had the chance to do it over again, I would still make the same choices. Thank you.
Hi. I would like to thank first of all to Miriam for including me in this memorial to Nawal. And she asked me to remember what she meant to me when she was a Duke. I came to Duke in January of 1993. And I think was, and then I learned that she was just, so yes, came to Duke in the previous semester. So I think it was March, more or less, that a talk by Nawal El Saadawi was announced. And I said, well, that's one of the reasons perhaps why I came to Duke, to have the opportunity to listen to such figures like Nawal. And I went, the room was full. Nawal was sitting, the presentation was going on. And I knew about Nawal, but it was the first time I saw her in person. The kind of the brown skin and the white silver hair. She was listening to the presentation. When the presentation was over, she stood up, went to the blackboard, and drew a triangle. And in each vertices of the triangle, she put God, money, veil. With her calm, she turned to the audience and asked, what is the relationship between these three signs? And she spoke for an hour and 15 minutes, just like that. No papers, no reading anything, just talking and reasoning and keeping the audience in her hands. And I was very happy for many things, not just because of what she was saying, but also said, well, this is a third world intellectual. This is how the third world intellectual, where I grew up in Argentina and in Latin America, I was used to. I didn't know Miriam and Bruce at the time, but I became friend of them shortly. And because of that, I had the opportunity to see and talk to Nawal in a kind of very kind of familiar family setting, let's put it that way. And I saw her again a couple of times that she came back. So during that conversation, I began to see Nawal either like an elder sister or a younger aunt, because of that warmth, that kind of humanity. That was a kind of the other side of the kind of brilliant fighter and intellectual figure. Several years after, I had been teaching since 95 a seminar on decoloniality with kind of many iterations, but several years I put her, some of her work in one of the units with a kind of examine how women are responding to coloniality. And I put it because, I mean, in the context of women of color in the United States and third world women. And I remember that she made, I mean, the text that we were reading elicit some kind of discomfort among the audience, because she was kind of addressing the question of the difference between the issues of feminism in the third world and how these were addressed in the United States. So through those two vignettes, Nawal, three vignettes, I mean, her talk, her kind of family figure, her kind of loving attitude, and her kind of third world feminist, as Bruce said, will never be forgotten. Thank you.
Thank you so much for giving me the chance to talk about Nawal El Saadawi, this fantastic friend, mentor. By the way, I'm talking to you from Beirut, where I organized a conference where she was present in 2015, not so long ago. And she would always ask me, she knew I sang, and she would always ask me to bring my guitar and to sing. And I had written some songs especially for her. When I was a student of literature in the States, I had left Lebanon because I wanted to find out who I was as a woman and discover freedom, which I couldn't find in my country of birth, Lebanon. I left and I started reading about women's issues. I was very influenced by Simone de Beauvoir. And then all of a sudden I discover Nawal Saadawi, whom I consider more even than the Simone de Beauvoir of the Arab world. And I was teaching her. And at the time also, I had become very aware of the problem of genital mutilation, excision. In fact, my first novel is entitled L'excisé. And I had not read yet Nawal Saadawi. And around the same time as my novel was coming out, she had all this book also on her own excision. So I found all these similarities between what I had lived and that another woman from the Arab world was sharing the same suffering, the same plight. And it was so encouraging to me to be able to teach her novels. When I organized a conference at the University of Illinois in the early 80s, I decided to invite her. And it was an incredible meeting. Nawal had just come out of prison. And I remember how she was suffering a lot from backache. It had been very difficult for her, that stay in prison. And but she was so alive, and she was drawing these huge audiences. And the Arab students were so happy to have a spokesperson speaking for them in the States. It was just amazing. And yet she was such a humble woman, speaking for all the women, always making you feel that you were unique, that she was speaking to you in a unique way because you were unique and you needed to go further with your strength and your revolution, sense of revolution. And over the years, we met in Paris again. We went to La Fête de l'Humanité together. And then we met in Egypt, we met in Lebanon. And when I heard about her passing away, I was really devastated. It was like, another another strength in my life, leaving. And I was, I have been going through a lot recently with the explosion, the port of Beirut. I almost died. And so I need the support from other women. And this is what Nawal was giving us. But then I felt, no, she's still with us. I feel she's with us. And I'm very thankful that my friend Miriam Cooke organized this conference with the help of Duke University. And I'm very happy that we are able to talk about her and to honor her memory and to have this amazing time remembering her and continue to push her ideas. So thank you very much.
Hello? We can
Yes.
hear you. Oh, you can hear me.
You,
I'm
that's great.
very
Thanks.
pleased to be with all of you here today. It's very comforting to be together. I came to know Nawal through The Hidden Face of Eve when it was first published. It was published in London in 1980. I was mesmerized by how she combined personal experience, breaking the silence around sexuality and the female body, with historical accounts of outspoken and independent-minded Muslim and Arab women. In 1985, Nawal was finally able to register the Arab Women's Solidarity Association, AUSA, in Cairo after years of trying. AUSA became the epicenter of second-wave feminism at a time when the arch-patriarchal forces of political Islam were on the rampage. AUSA engaged in intellectual activism through conferences and nedwas, or public seminars. For AUSA's inaugural 1986 conference, at a time when reveiling was resurging in Egypt and elsewhere, Nawal adopted the slogan, "Unveiling the Mind." AUSA conferences drew young and middle-aged women and men from Egypt and other Arab countries, along with some Westerners. The conferences were forums for sharing the latest research and on women and gender, and were sites of feminist camaraderie. The monthly nedwas were more edgy than the conferences. They drew a mainly middle-aged audience of women and men, often prominent in their professions and public life. They were mainly leftists and progressives, with some religious conservatives and Islamists also joining in to debate gender issues, human rights, economic development, culture, and democracy. I remember a nedwa in the late 80s when Nawal had invited the writer, theater critic, and journalist Safinaz Kazem, and an Islamist in her own way, to speak. She had been one of the first women to return to the veil in the 60s. Safinaz was sharing her views on Islam, and when suddenly a shouting match broke out between her and the audience, and she abruptly left the room. Nawal kept her calm. The evening ended peacefully, if acrimoniously. I remember having seen the journalist and human rights activist Farag Foda at the Nedwa where Safinaz had spoken. The dangers of letting views be known in those days, in those fiery meetings, were far greater than I had understood at the time. In 1992, Farag Foda was assassinated by Islamist extremists. The following year, Nawal went into exile. Meanwhile, in 1991, the state had shut down AUSA because Nawal had opposed the Gulf War. The last times I saw Nawal were during the 2011 revolution. I remember one evening in the thick of things, when I took the elevator to the 26th floor of her building overlooking the Nile and opened the door, went into her small flat, I found it jam-packed with youth, women and men, all talking at once, full of optimism and excitement as they were plotting next steps. And I can still see at this moment the famous mane of white hair flying like a flag over everyone. That is my memory.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Well, first of all, I want to thank Miriam for inviting me to this wonderful event and this gathering. and also for her very important role in Nawal's life in offering her refuge at a time of need and enabling her to be as creative as she wanted to be. So thank you, Miriam, and also thanks to Duke University for hosting this wonderful conference. So the first time I met Nawal, I think this was the first time, was at a women's studies conference here in the United States, sometime in the early 1980s. All I remember about that conference today was a conversation which took place between Nawal and a woman who had invited her there, a conversation which for some reason I was party to. In the course of it, Nawal's host, I'll call her Ms. A, began telling Nawal that she was not to speak about such and such issues. I don't recall which. Nawal's instant response was astonished outrage. "You're telling me, Nawal El Saadawi," she said, "what I can and cannot speak about?" This obviously was absurd, given that Nawal had famously gone to prison for saying and writing exactly what she thought. I joined her in her protest, and Ms. A soon backed down. The author of more than 40 books, Nawal was a dynamo of intellectual and imaginative creativity, forever generating new ideas, new books, new novels, new forms of writing. For she was an innovator as a writer too. She had the gift, among other things, of being able to write not always, but often enough, compellingly and even mesmerizingly, in both her fiction and nonfiction. In addition, she also continually challenged not only patriarchy, but all systems of power and oppression wherever she saw them. Her primary targets were often, at least through the first decades of her career, the cultural practices and beliefs of Egypt, the Arab world, and Islam. But more recently, she also wrote incisively about many issues of our times, and her work is of relevance well beyond the region from which she came. It would be a mistake to ghettoize her as relevant only to Islam and the Arab world. Nawal was a force of nature, a global figure and global thinker. Her thought and body of work, consistently critical of systems of power, raise questions about many aspects of our lives and world today in whatever culture or country we find ourselves. Am I therefore also saying that I always agreed with Nawal about everything, or even that one should always agree with her about everything? Of course not. In fact, one doesn't typically agree or disagree with forces of nature, the wind, the sea, or people of the extraordinary creativity, insight, and imagination of Nawal El Saadawi. My sense of loss at this moment, with Nawal's living presence and living voice now gone from this world, is acute and personal. We've been colleagues and fellow workers in relation to women in Islam, as well as warm and cordial friends over these many decades. I will miss her voice and miss learning from her typically insightful perspectives on whatever is going on in our world. It was a great honor and privilege to have known her, as well as a great gift and a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, Leila. Thank you, Evelyne, Margot, Walter, Zimu. It's been really wonderful to have this opportunity for us to get together, but also to get together with over 220 other people. So it's a comfort. It's really, I think, a comfort to all of us who feel that we've lost so much. So thank you to all of you who have joined us from around the world, and it is indeed around the world: China, Indonesia, Egypt, Europe, Lebanon, around the world. So in closing, we at Duke would welcome comments, remembrances that any of you have of Nawal. And so Sarah Rogers, who has been doing the technical part of this meeting, She will be sending each one of you a link. And so we will then compile those remembrances. And the event has been recorded. So Bassem Haddad of Jadaliya has kindly offered, and also enthusiastically, so thank you, Bassem, has offered to circulate this recording. So for those of you who know people who wished that they could have participated or just attended, it will be available through Jadaliya. And it will then at that time also be available with your remembrances. Also, the participants in today's events, plus a couple of people from another event that happened yesterday, a more private event that was organized by Fawzia Afzal Khan, will join us in a collection of short essays that will be published through the Journal of Middle East Women's Studies. So thank you everyone for being with us. Nawal is definitely smiling her 100-watt smile. So love to you, Nawal. We'll miss you.